While modal melodies did appear during the common practice period, they are unusual, and a consistent modal compositional practice did not develop until the end of the 19th century. At that point, a number of composers developed techniques that allowed them to mix and match modes at will. Antonin Dvorak was a master of this kind of music. His New World Symphony is a tour de force of modal technique. The introduction to the symphony starts out in E Aeolian. There is some confusion about Aeolian, natural minor, harmonic minor, and melodic minor. Today, most music theory teachers usually mention natural minor as a theoretical basis for all minor keys. Natural minor provides a key signature for minor scales, but was not used in common practice music because it contains no leading tone between the 7th scale degree and tonic. Common practice composers were obsessed with leading tones, so they consistently added one to the minor scale, creating harmonic minor. Doing this creates a gap in the scale, an augmented second, which sounds like a minor third between the 6th and 7th scale degrees. To fill in this gap, melodic minor has a raised 6th. But now the scale sounds too much like major, so in its descending form, natural minor was used. In reality, composers raised and lowered the 6th and 7th scale degrees pretty much at will, so melodic minor is essentially a catch-all term. It also encompasses natural minor, harmonic minor, and Dorian. Most 19th century theory books only taught harmonic minor. Take a look at this example from Hermann Zeroni's translation of the first volume of A.B. Marx's book, The Theory and Practice of Musical Composition. While arbitrary chromatics are obviously allowed in practice, they were not usually a part of basic music theory teaching. This means that for 19th century composers, the basic structure of a minor scale includes a leading tone. A minor scale without it is therefore modal, Aeolian. This melody is followed by some going-to music in octatonic. Octatonic scales are uncommon in 19th century music, and when they are used, they almost always occur as colorful quasi-chromatic going-to music. Notice that the first octatonic figure, the descending one, leads into a reference, a kind of a premonition of the main theme of the movement, mapped onto a D fully diminished chord. Octatonic scales are commonly used today in jazz, where they are harmonized with fully diminished chords. Dvorak's doing the same kind of thing here. The main theme of the first movement's in Aeolian. Dvorak adds a leading tone chromatic at the end of the first statement, but returns to a flattened 7th for the end of the theme, thus retaining the theme's modal quality. The second theme is also in Aeolian, this time in G minor. Note the lowered 7th at the end. Dvorak adds a third theme to this version of sonata form. I think this theme's in pentatonic. It contains a few notes not usually found in pentatonic, but the overall modal quality of the tune is shaped by the gapped minor thirds from G to E and B to D. Music theory students are often upset by this kind of melody. They will say it sounds pentatonic, but it isn't really pentatonic because it includes notes that are not normally in the pentatonic scale. I will respond by saying, if it sounds pentatonic, it is pentatonic. The term pentatonic is used to describe the sound of the mode. It doesn't really matter whether extraneous notes are present. The opening of the second movement is mysterious. Its essential quality is determined by harmony, so it's probably not appropriate to spend much time on it here. I think it's probably an octatonic, so that's how I've marked it. The famous main theme from the second movement is pentatonic, with a few extraneous pitches in the middle. There are two different main ideas in the B section of the second movement. Both are in Aeolian. The third movement has an Aeolian theme with interspersed pentatonic passage work. The trio section of the third movement is pentatonic, with one added pitch. A second theme appears that could be pentatonic, but it sounds major to me. I think that this is because it lacks minor third leaps, that characteristic gap found in pentatonic scales. The last movement begins an octatonic over a B drone. The B is not actually in the scale, so I'm not sure that Dvorak really thought of the passage in this way, but in the fourth and fifth measures, you hear the obvious sound of an octatonic scale in the ascending line. The main theme of the movement's in Aeolian and E, with a transposition to B Phrygian following that. The second theme of the movement is in regular old major. It's perhaps the most typically romantic sounding melody in the entire piece. In addition to modality in these melodies, Dvorak extends his modal technique into harmony to produce some astonishing effects. We'll talk about that in a later video. I'm fairly certain that Dvorak developed the modal techniques he used in the New World Symphony himself, that he didn't get these techniques from some sort of music theory textbook. There's a widely held belief that composers in the 19th century could not conceive of diatonic modality. By this I mean using the modes without alteration. This is particularly true for the lowered 7th scale degree. I found some evidence for what 19th century composers really could conceive of in Daniel Jellensperger's music theory book. I know that Jellensperger is documenting 19th century practice because he tells us so right in the title of the book, Harmony at the Beginning of the 19th Century. In this book, Jellensperger includes a diatonic harmonization of the hymn tune Jesu meine Freude. This hymn tune's in Dorian. Take a look at the first and last phrases. The cadences of these phrases have minor fives going to minor ones. This is a very uncommon practice sound. It's a very modal sound. The second and third phrases are in C major. The third phrase even has a dominant 7th chord. These have a conventional common practice sound. The fourth phrase is in F major, and again is fairly conventional. The second to last phrase, Jellensperger marks it as being in C. To me, it sounds kind of modal. I think this is because there's an E minor chord going to an F major chord at the cadence. This sounds to me like a kind of a Lydian cadence. So while the middle part of the chorale has a conventional sound, the rest is typically modal, Dorian and Lydian. That part of the chorale could almost be a hymn tune setting by a 20th century composer like Vaughan Williams. Jellensperger asked the question, and I quote, "Did the Dorians only use the tones D, E, F, G, A, B, C when accompanying such a melody?" This is a quaint notion, that the ancient Greeks were running around out there harmonizing Lutheran hymn tunes in 4-part harmony, vaguely in the style of Vaughan Williams. He answers this question himself by saying, quote, "Very doubtful." Jellensperger went on to say that everyone has dealt with their own old melodies, and the most famous composers have rarely been content with the tones of the key and the accompanying voices, as was done in the previous example, but used all of the tones of the chromatic scale. Then Jellensperger offers an example of his own practice. He makes the melody sound 19th century by adding chromatics. When looking at the melody alone, Jellensperger wrote, "It seems to the listener accustomed to today's music, there is really nothing in it that prevents one from thinking of it in major and minor." So it isn't that common practice composers couldn't conceive of modal music, it's just that they didn't like it. They liked the sound of good old major and minor. Next time, we'll talk about chromaticism, and we'll look at the function of Jellensperger's added chromatics.